Underwhelming was Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff's blunt description of Kimi Antonelli's, well, yes, actually pretty underwhelming, Italian Grand Prix. It was a stark change in tone from Mercedes about Antonelli, who it's so far been very protective of. Has it realised this is all too much too soon and isn't working? Antonelli's home Grand Prix was supposed to be his chance to get back on track after a practice crash and collision with Charles Leclerc in the race spoiled the Zandvoort weekend that had at least featured slightly encouraging race pace, but it quickly went awry again in Italy with another practice crash. A poor start from 6th on the grid was followed by repeated track limits warnings and a penalty for forcing Alex Albon off track that left him 9th. Antonelli admitted missing long runs on Friday because of his crash meant he wasn't really prepared for the race. It was the first time Wolff sounded truly exasperated with his young protege. He used the word underwhelming 4 times in one answer. Even beyond the result, penalty and weekend skewing practice mistake, Wolff also felt Antonelli had wasted far too much time behind Pierre Gasly's Alpine early in the race because he was still spooked from crashing into Leclerc at Zandvoort. As far as Wolff's concerned, Gasly is a driver that should not be in your way, and who a Mercedes driver shouldn't even lose a second behind. While poor Gasly caught a few strays there that we're sure Toto didn't mean quite like that, his point was that Antonelli keeps letting what Wolff calls the baggage or even trauma of one error hamper him next time out too, or even for longer than that. Antonelli admitted earlier in the season that his notorious crash early in his FP1 debut for Mercedes at Monza last year made his driving overcautious for the first half of this year. That Monza 2024 shunt was the worst start possible, pushing too hard too soon and misjudging the available grip. It stuck in his mind and forced him to change his approach inside the car and suppress his natural instinct to throw caution to the wind and just go for it. Even amid his criticism, Wolff still believes Antonelli is going to be very, very, very good in the end. He has only just turned 19, and this is not just his first F1 season, but only his 4th in car racing at all, after a rapid rise that included plenty of titles at junior single-seater's lowest rungs before he skipped F3 and was a bit sketchy in F2 with a struggling Prema team. These are still very early days. And Antonelli's F1 drive appears to be in no jeopardy for now. He has this seat at least until the end of 2026. There are no viable alternatives on the market now, even if Mercedes did want to rethink that. The hope earlier in the season was that Mercedes abandoning its upgraded rear suspension, which cost more in driver confidence and car predictability than it offered in accessible performance upsides, would help Antonelli find his feet. And though on paper the race results suggest it hasn't, his actual performances have improved from the low of his horribly off-the-pace Belgian Grand Prix weekend. At Monza, he was only just over 0.04 of a second slower than George Russell in qualifying. It's just actually executing a fully clean weekend and producing consistent pace still isn't happening. The Monza tone shift felt like an attempt to change things up on Wolff's side. Perhaps he feels he's been overprotective of Antonelli so far, and that a tougher public approach might do the trick. He talked of freeing him up, saying we need to get rid of the ballast that is holding Antonelli back mentally. But now it feels like Wolff's faith isn't limitless. The start of 2026 has to be better than this, otherwise Antonelli won't be safe going into 2027, when more alternatives will be on the market, maybe including that Max Verstappen chap that Mercedes has openly coveted for ages. And speaking of Verstappen, he's always been part of the problem for Antonelli. Wolff created trouble for himself by hailing Antonelli as the next Verstappen even before Kimi turned a wheel in an F1 car, and it didn't help when Wolff dipped back into the well of Verstappen comparisons in his defence of Antonelli after Zandvoort. Wolff contended that all the big ones make mistakes, and that there were plenty such moments during Verstappen's rookie F1 season with Toro Rosso. But how many mistakes did Max really make? He careered into Romain Grosjean's Lotus in Monaco and went off on cold tyres on a British Grand Prix restart. In the second half of that season, there wasn't much else to report in terms of major incidents. You're basically talking about one silly crash at Silverstone on his own and one sillier crash in Monaco where he wiped out another car. The overwhelming impression Verstappen gave in that season was that he absolutely belonged in F1, despite only being 17-18. And some of his performances were exceptional too. Top 6 on the grid and points in only his second race in Malaysia, finishing 4th in Hungary and again in a wet-dry US Grand Prix in a midfield car. In one sense, Antonelli has already been set up to fail by his team boss comparing him to a generational talent in Verstappen, whom Wolff himself publicly coveted and tried to sign. It's not that Antonelli hasn't produced any stunning highlights of his own. That drive to 4th on his debut in the wet of Melbourne was superb, as was his sprint pole in Miami, plus that Canada podium. It's not even the fact that he's generally been slower than his teammate Russell. Verstappen too lost the Toro Rosso intra-team qualifying battle to fellow rookie Carlos Sainz. who, to be fair, had significantly more than Verstappen's one prior season of experience in single-seaters behind him before graduating to F1. Antonelli's racing for a top team in his first season, what Wolff calls the mammoth of Mercedes, so can't make his mistakes in a lower pressure environment, and indeed there is perhaps a greater likelihood of mistakes in the first place under that added pressure to perform. But there's also the fact that Antonelli has replaced the most successful F1 driver of all time in Lewis Hamilton, a tough act to follow in itself, and Mercedes' huge faith in Antonelli played a part in Hamilton's exit. The team's reluctance to offer Hamilton as long a contract as he wanted was what put leaving on his radar, and that contract reluctance stemmed from Mercedes suspecting Antonelli might soon become a better bet if Hamilton faded with age. Then there's the fact Antonelli is being benchmarked against Russell, a driver who proved himself every bit as fast, if not faster, in the same team as Hamilton over their 3 seasons together. Russell hasn't won a world championship, but he would be in most experts' top 5 drivers on the current grid. Sainz was very good in 2015, but he wasn't at that level in his first F1 season, and he was a rookie, same as Max, so Verstappen arguably had a much easier ride than Antonelli is having in that respect. But Antonelli is being upstaged in 2025 by other rookies, Racing Bull's recent podium finisher Isaac Hadjar and Sauber's underdog hero Gabriel Bortoleto. Of course, in a parallel universe, it could be Hadjar struggling against Russell in a difficult Mercedes, or Antonelli looks to have the world at his feet because of some giant-slaying performances in a very drivable and user-friendly Racing Bulls that isn't expected to challenge for podiums. It could be that the 2025 Mercedes is similar to the 2025 Red Bull, difficult to drive and just not that good, but Russell is better able to make it work than Antonelli because of his greater experience and comfort within the team, allied to his formidable skill and self-confidence. This is where Wolff's Antonelli-Verstappen comparison has most merit. It's all situational, and then it's about whether that situation is correct or not for maximising the performance of the driver. What Verstappen was able to do next was jump into Red Bull's main team and immediately challenge incumbent benchmark Daniel Ricciardo, eventually dethroning him as Red Bull's team leader and driving on to incredible success. Antonelli may well be capable of the same, but he's not offered the strength of actual evidence yet that Verstappen had by this point. Red Bull won the race to sign Verstappen because it was uniquely placed to accelerate his path to F1, but it still gave him 23 races in its junior team before sticking him up against Ricciardo in the same car. The circumstances at Mercedes are completely different. There are partner teams it can lean on, but no junior squad it can dictate terms to. Hamilton also somewhat forced Mercedes' hand in 2024 by walking away 1 year earlier than expected. But Mercedes could still have recruited an experienced free agent like Carlos Sainz and worked to place Antonelli at somewhere like Williams to better prepare him for the big league. Wolff waited a bit too long with Russell, as his almost victorious 2020 Mercedes debut alongside Valtteri Bottas at Sakir proved. But those learning seasons with Williams were still invaluable in helping Russell build his own foundation quietly, making mistakes under less pressure, learning from them, figuring out how to conduct himself, adjusting to communicate with the team in the right way, countless other intangibles that meant he was a more rounded driver when it came to crunch time against Hamilton in 2022. It's hard to escape the feeling that Mercedes almost wanted to one-up Red Bull by doing with Antonelli what it refused to do with Verstappen all those years ago, when it would have had to drop race winner and future champion Nico Rosberg to make space, so offered Max only a fully funded season in GP2 instead. It's good that Wolff believes so wholeheartedly in Antonelli's raw ability, but raw is the key word there, and maybe this has been too much too soon for a driver who is clearly very good, but is consistently struggling to show the best of himself. Does Mercedes now fear it might have inadvertently set Antonelli up to fail by creating such high expectations while also accelerating his path to F1? Whenever Verstappen did suffer a rare setback in 2015, he usually immediately followed up with a superb performance that dispelled the negatives. Antonelli's problem is that he's stuck in a negative spiral. Yes, the car has been difficult, particularly in the period where Mercedes unexpectedly downgraded its rear suspension, but equally, Antonelli has admitted he was unable to adapt his driving to that change, something that is usually a hallmark of the very best drivers. It should be said that F1 in 2025 is more competitive in terms of field spread than it was in 2015, when the new V6 hybrid turbo cars were only in their second season, and many people were complaining they were too slow compared to the junior categories. The 2025 ground effect machines are entirely different beasts, heavier, much faster, and clearly quite particular in the way they need to be set up and driven. But how well the likes of Hadjar and Bortoleto have adapted straight out of F2, despite having no real F1 testing program to prepare them, whereas Antonelli had plenty of old car running, still reflects badly on Antonelli in comparison. Wolff describes Antonelli as a fierce competitor and a monster when the visor goes down, but also a kid with maturity beyond his years who acknowledges shortcomings. He says the bigger limitation is the tricky car Mercedes built for 2025, and at least before Monza, he found it easier to forgive Antonelli's errors because Mercedes isn't fighting for the World Championship. The subtext there is that Mercedes won't be so forgiving if its 2026 car is capable of fighting for the title again, and Antonelli is still finding ways to underwhelm.